Histology is the study of tissues, which is the next level of organization of living things. Tissues can be referred to as the fabric of life. A tissue is a group of cells that have a similar structure and a similar function. They're all working together to perform the same job. There are four major tissue types. Epithelial tissue primarily covers things. Connective tissue is involved in supporting structures. Nervous tissue is involved in controlling the body, and muscle tissue is involved in movement. Epithelial tissue covers surfaces, lines cavities, and forms glands. It has several functions: protection, absorption, filtration, excretion, secretion, and sensory reception. Epithelial tissues show cellularity, that is, the cells are closely packed together and tend to form sheets of cells. The cells are held together by either tight junctions and desmosomes. There is very little matrix between the cells. Matrix is non-living extracellular material, and these cells are packed very tightly together. Because epithelial cells line or cover, they have a polarity to them, a top and a bottom. The apical surface is the upper free edge. Some of the apical surfaces will have microvilli or cilia depending upon the function of that tissue. Then the cells sit on their basilar surface. This is the surface that's going to be on the interior of the cell layer. It sits on a basal lamina, which is a non-cellular adhesive sheet. In other words, this is a non-living material secreted by the cells that helps act as a scaffolding when this tissue has to repair. Epithelial tissue is always supported by connective tissue. This connective tissue is called the reticular lamina. It's some extracellular material with collagen fibers in it. It sits under the basal lamina, or the basement membrane of the epithelial tissue. So the entire thing, the basal lamina from the epithelial tissue and the reticular lamina from the connective tissue, makes up what is known as the basement membrane. The basement membrane helps keep epithelium from tearing and serves as a boundary between the epithelium and the underlying connective tissue. In some instances, cancer cells penetrate the basement membrane and invade the underlying tissues. Epithelial tissues are well innervated. They have a good supply of nerve fibers. They're also avascular. There are no blood vessels in the epithelial tissue. It gets nourishment by substances diffusing up from the underlying connective tissue. Epithelial cells retain their ability to divide throughout your life, so they are regenerative. They can replace themselves, which is good because we're constantly shedding these to the environment. When we classify epithelial tissue, we look at two things. One of the things is the number of cell layers. It's called a simple tissue if there is only one layer of cells. It is a stratified tissue if there's more than one layer of cells, and you can see the shape of the cells change with the layering. Sometimes we have pseudostratified tissue. This is when it looks like it's layered, but it's truly not layered. Every cell has an apical surface and sits on the basement membrane. The other thing we look at for classifying epithelial tissue is the shape of the cells. Squamous cells are flat or irregular in shape. Cuboidal cells are cube or box-like, and columnar cells are columnar. They look like a column. Simple squamous epithelium is a single layer of flat cells. This will allow for rapid diffusion of material from one side of the cell layer to the other. So here you see some simple squamous epithelium. Endothelium is the lining of the blood vessels, and it is a simple squamous epithelium. And then the mesothelium is the simple stratified squamous cells that make up serous membranes. This happens to be the lining of the lung that we're looking at in this picture. Simple cuboidal epithelium is a single layer of cube-like cells. This is very common in glands. You see the cube-like cells here in a single layer lining those tubes. They're involved in secretion and absorption. We see these in the kidneys, the ovaries, and the ducts of the small glands, to mention a few places. Simple columnar epithelium is a single layer of tall cells. They may have goblet cells interspersed in them that will secrete mucus. It's not uncommon for them to either have dense microvilli on their surface, as we see in the digestive tract, or cilia, as we'll see in the bronchial tubes and the uterus. Pseudostratified columnar epithelium is really a single layer of cells. It just appears as though it's a multiple layer because the nuclei are all at different levels. What makes this a simple layer is every cell has one apical surface and it goes all the way to the basement membrane. Often these cells are ciliated and they may also function in secretion, particularly mucus. We see these kinds of cells in the trachea, and these cilia help bring mucus up to the throat so it can be eliminated. The mucus acts to trap bacteria that may get down into the trachea. The cilia are one of the first casualties of smoking. Stratified epithelium is usually a stratified squamous epithelium. We'll see this in the esophagus, the mouth, and the skin, the epidermis. But here you see several layers of cells, and they are those flattened, irregular shaped cells that are squamous cells. Epithelial tissue is also involved in producing glands. Glands are simply one or more cells that make and secrete some sort of product. They can be classified in two ways. Endocrine cells secrete internally. They do not have ducts and they secrete directly into the blood. Hormones, for example, are secreted from inside the cell to their extracellular matrix and then diffuse into the blood. Exocrine glands produce their secretions and secrete them into tubes known as ducts. These ducts will deliver them to some sort of surface. There are numerous exocrine glands scattered throughout the body, and they will deliver their products through ducts either to surfaces of the body or into body cavities. The simplest of glands are the unicellular exocrine glands. These are single cells, so they don't really have ducts. They simply open directly to the outside. Mucus cells and goblet cells are examples of unicellular exocrine glands. These are found in the intestinal lining and in the respiratory tract. They produce a substance called mucin. Mucin is kind of a sugar protein. When it dissolves in water, it forms mucus, which is a slimy, protective, lubricating coating. Multicellular exocrine glands usually grow in or out of epithelial sheets. They're composed of ducts and a number of secretory units. Usually they're surrounded by supportive connective tissue, and this is what supplies blood and nerve fibers to the gland. The connective tissue usually forms a capsule around the gland and may even extend into the gland to help divide it into lobes. Here you see several types of glands, a fairly simple tubular gland. These are found a lot in the intestine. A more complicated branching gland, these are found in the small intestine. This simple branch kind of gland is like an oil gland. Here are what the milk glands sort of look like. And this is an example of the salivary glands. So we have these secretory, the pink things are the secretory cells. And then the remaining cells help produce the ductwork that will get the secretion to some sort of surface. All of these cells are epithelial cells. The next tissue is the connective tissue. This is the most abundant and widely distributed of the primary tissues. It functions in binding and support, protection, insulation, and transportation. While connective tissue itself varies quite a bit, they all have a common origin. They all arise from cells that are called mesenchyme cells. They have varying degrees of vascularity. Cartilage, for example, is avascular. There is no direct blood supply to cartilage. Dense connective tissue has some vascularization, and bone has a very rich blood supply. The connective tissue cells lie in an extracellular matrix. This is a non-living matrix that keeps the cells separated. Connective tissue cells do not touch, so there are no cell junctions between them. This matrix is what gives the connective tissue its unique characteristics, its flexibility or its strength or whatever it is that this particular connective tissue does. Connective tissue will have what's called ground substance, which is part of that matrix, and fibers. And the type of fibers will give the connective tissue some of its unique features. There will be fibroblasts. These will be cells that live in this connective tissue that produce the fibers. And then depending upon the nature of the connective tissue, there may be other cells in there, macrophages, white blood cells, or even fat globules. These can vary with the connective tissue, but all of them have to have fibroblasts of some sort. The ground substance is the unstructured material that's between the cells. This is the material through which all solutes will have to diffuse from the blood to get to the cells themselves. It is composed of interstitial fluid, which is mostly water, and various cell adhesion proteins. This is the glue that helps keep everything stuck together inside of connective tissue. And finally, there are proteoglycans. These are proteins that have a polysaccharide coating around them. You may have heard of chondroitin sulfate, for example, or hyaluronic acid. These proteins help trap water. Now, depending on the number of proteoglycans, you'll have a different amount of water in the different connective tissues. This amount of water will affect the viscosity of the ground substance. It can be very, very thick, or it can be somewhat watery, just depending upon the proteoglycans present. The fibers provide the support in the connective tissue, and there are three basic fiber types. Collagen is the most abundant. This is a very tough fiber that has a high tensile strength. That is, it has a lot of strength to it. The protein for collagen is secreted into the extracellular matrix by the fibroblasts and immediately form the collagen fibers. The purpose of collagen injections is to put that collagen protein into your tissues and then hope that it produces the same kind of fibers. Elastic tissues are long, thin, and stretchy. They're made of a protein called elastin. This allows the material to stretch and recoil, sort of like rubber bands. We find a lot of elastic tissue in places where we need to blow things up or stretch things out and have them go back to their original shape, like the skin, the lungs, and the blood vessels. And then the third type of fiber is a reticular fiber. This is a shorter fiber, very fine, and has a lot of branching to it. It's made of the same material as collagen, but with a little different chemistry behind it. So it's not quite collagen, but it's like collagen. These fibers branch and form networks. They offer more give, and they help support soft tissues. All of the connective tissue cells arise from embryonic cells called mesenchyme. These are the stem cells for connective tissue. All connective tissue cells come from this. There are always a few mesenchyme cells in the body. Connective tissue is regenerative. It can replace itself with the same kind of tissue. When we talk about a blast cell, a blast is simply an immature cell. It's involved in secreting the ground substance or the fibers. So we talk about fibroblasts. They're found in connective tissue proper. Chondroblasts are found in cartilage. Osteoblasts are found in bone. And then the hematopoietic stem cell is found and produces the blood. The suffix "cyte" is used for mature cells, so you can have a fibrocyte or a chondrocyte or an osteocyte. These mature cells help maintain the matrix. Once it's been formed, they help maintain it. Various cyte cells can revert back to blast forms if the matrix is injured and we need to replace it. Connective tissue proper has two classes. We have what's called loose connective tissue. This is areolar, adipose, and reticular. And then we have the dense connective tissues, the dense regular, the dense irregular, and the elastic tissue. Then on top of this, we're going to have bone and blood. As we look at the areolar tissue, this is the most widely distributed tissue in the body. It helps cushion organs, it binds body parts together. It also has a lot of space and can store nutrients. This areolar tissue has some very light kind of elastic fibers, as well as a few very tiny, thin collagen fibers. So it has some give to it, and it has some strength to it. It also is capable of holding a lot of fluid, and if extra interstitial fluid collects in this space, we have something called edema. The adipose tissue acts as a shock absorber, an insulator, and fuel storage area. Here the cells are filled with large globules of fat. This is the insulator, the protector, and also fat, you'll remember, is our big storage molecule for energy. Adipose tissue is located under the skin. It does a lot of insulating and some protecting there, around the kidneys, and it's collected in the breasts. And then out of the connective tissue proper, we have the reticular tissue. This is a network of fibers itself. It will support loose organs or other cell types. So the function of this tissue is really to have the fibers form the network, and then the cells can rest inside this network. We find a lot of reticular tissue in lymph nodes, bone marrow, and spleen. These are very soft, mushy tissues because they're primarily cells just supported by these reticular fibers. Dense regular connective tissue has parallel collagen fibers with fibroblasts. So we have all of this collagen and a few fibroblasts to keep replacing those collagen fibers. Because collagen has that high tensile strength, these kinds of tissues are able to withstand great pulling forces. However, they don't have a good blood supply. They're not going to heal well if they're damaged. This is what tendons and ligaments are made of. The dense irregular connective tissue has lots of collagen fibers, but this time rather than being all in parallel lines, they're in irregular arrangements, so they crisscross each other. We've got the strength of collagen, but we've got some flexibility. So we have this kind of tissue in areas where there's a lot of tension on the tissue, but it's exerted in lots of different directions. We find this kind of tissue in the dermis of the skin and in the joints because of the great structural strength it provides. Elastic connective tissue has a lot of elastic fibers in it, plus the collagen fibers. The number of collagen fibers are not quite as great as we see in a dense connective tissue, but we have quite a bit of collagen, and interspersed we have these elastic fibers. We find this in areas that need strength and a lot of flexibility. Some ligaments can stretch a little bit, so those that connect the vertebra have some elastic fibers in them, and the walls of the blood vessels have to stretch quite a bit, particularly the aorta and the larger arteries. Cartilage is a tough, flexible connective tissue that does not have a nerve supply and it does not have a blood supply. It is avascular. It is surrounded by a vascular perichondrium, and it's the perichondrium that produces the chondroblasts and the chondrocytes and provides nutrients to the deeper cartilage tissue. Because there is not a direct blood supply to cartilage, cartilage is very slow to heal. The chondrocytes, the cells that maintain the matrix, are found in cavities in the matrix. These cavities are called lacuna. The fibers in the matrix give the cartilage different properties. The chondrocytes help form and maintain the matrix. They're found in those cavities in the matrix, and they make different kinds of fibers. The type of fibers found in the matrix gives different cartilage different characteristics. There are three types of cartilage: hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. Hyaline cartilage is the most abundant of the cartilage. It gives support with flexibility. There are collagen fibers in the matrix, but they appear glassy, so this looks like a clear kind of matrix. We find hyaline cartilage on the ends of the bones, in the nose, in the joints, and in the trachea. The embryonic skeleton is made of hyaline cartilage before it turns into bone, and if you've ever eaten meat, this hyaline cartilage is the gristle you find in meat. Elastic cartilage is hyaline cartilage with elastic fibers in it. This gives us the strength of hyaline cartilage, but more stretch and flexibility. This is the kind of cartilage that's found in your ear and the epiglottis of your larynx. And fibrocartilage has collagen fibers, more collagen fibers than we see in hyaline cartilage, but not as many as we see in dense regular connective tissue. As a result, this kind of cartilage is able to withstand high degrees of pressure. We say it's a compressible kind of cartilage. It gives very strong support. This is the kind of cartilage that's found between the vertebra of your back and in your knee joint. Because cartilage is avascular and loses its ability to divide as we age, injuries heal slowly. These kinds of injuries are very common in people who play sports and have sports-type injuries. Usually cartilage is damaged in those. As we get older, cartilage, particularly damaged cartilage, can have calcium deposit in it. Now this does not make it bone, but makes it rather more like chalk, so it's rather easy to crush. The cartilage can ossify or become bony, but here it tends to get bony spurs to it, and this causes inability for the joint to move well. Another disorder involving connective tissue is Marfan's syndrome. This is a genetic disease. Here, these people lack the ability to make the protein fibrillin. This is what is found in elastic fibers. As a result, these people have very loose joints, long limbs, spider-like fingers and toes, and weakened blood vessels. Elastic tissue is important in the major arteries, and if it's the aorta that is damaged, they are subject to aortic aneurysms. Marfan's syndrome has been seen in some famous people. Probably someone you will have some familiarity with is Abraham Lincoln. Bone is also a connective tissue. It's involved in supporting and protecting. We sometimes refer to it as osseous tissue. Here the matrix is very hard. There are still collagen fibers in it, but calcium salts deposit in the matrix to give it that firmness. Osteoblasts produce the matrix, and osteocytes maintain the matrix. The bone is arranged in structural units known as osteons. That's these little cores here. This is a blood vessel in the center, and here are the osteocytes out here in the matrix. You can see that there are a lot of blood vessels in bones, so bone is highly vascularized and heals quite well. And finally, our last connective tissue is blood. Now the matrix here is blood plasma. The fibers are soluble most of the time. They only become insoluble when the blood needs to clot or solidify. Blood is involved in transporting nutrients, wastes, and gases around the body. The cells are the white blood cells. Here's a lymphocyte and an eosinophil. The red blood cells and the platelets. The platelets are involved in clotting.